everybody. I'm Owen Hunt. I am the Secretary of WebDevUW, and tonight we'll be going over React, which is a JavaScript framework or library, depending on who you ask. But it's used to create reusable, customizable websites in a sort of much cleaner way than just writing HTML itself. It's one of the most commonly used libraries in web development, in industry or otherwise these days. And a lot of companies are using either React or React Native or other similar frameworks like Angular or Vue that make use of some of the same concepts. But for my money, React is the best you can get. So that's what we're going to be learning here tonight. So to get started, we're going to go and just take a look at just some HTML here. So as you will know, if you have any experience with HTML, if you came to any of our HTML tutorial nights back before our hackathon, or have learned HTML on your own, then you probably are familiar with HTML and what it looks like. It's got the tags here. You put things inside the body, and then you can build up your whole website just with some text in a paragraph. You can put a bunch of different kind of tags on here and just build up your website using these different building blocks of these tags. If we want to put something like an image in, we can do that. So let's put a picture of our good Vice President, Ryan Werner. So let's take that image and put that here. Oh, it's a rather large image, it appears. So let's take a look at a style. I'll be honest, I don't work a ton with just HTML, so there we go, much better. And then we'll close that. So now we can have a picture of Ryan Werner, and let's label that picture. Let's call it Ryan Werner. And in fact, people might not know what this means, so let's put put some more bold text at the beginning here, and we'll say name. So this is going to be right here. We have basically a little view of a picture of Ryan and what his name is, and then we can put some other things in, like maybe his role in the club or something like that. He is the vice president, and you can see now that we've got this nice little HTML output here of what it might look like if we put this together. But as you might know, Ryan is not the only member of our board here at WebDevUW. We also have Bailey and Hunter and myself. So let's say we wanted to create another component just like this one, another display showing all of our different board members. So now we have to go and copy and paste all of this and then go through and find all the different URLs, change the source here, change the name, change the role, and you can see that there's a lot of steps involved, and we have another nice looking little section here now for Bailey, but then we would have to go through and do it for Hunter and do it for myself. And now say, what if we wanted to add another feature to all of these, like the grad year of all of these different board members. So we could put another tag in here, and we could call it grad year, and then we would say 2021 for Bailey. And then we have that for Bailey now. But now we need to go through and add the same thing to all of our other board members and modify it there as well and make sure those are all up to date. And as you can see, even though all of these sections have very similar content and purposes, they don't get updated at the same time. They don't have any of the same information. It's like the application doesn't know anything at all about how we want to structure our website, which can be good and bad. In one sense, it's exactly what you're exactly seeing what you've put in the file here. So there's no need to reason about any logic or anything like that. It's quick to load, assuming that your images are small enough, and you'll get pretty much it's exactly what it says on the tin. But in terms of the development experience, as you can see, it took all of 5 minutes for me to put together just 4 pictures and 12 lines of text. And now, to maintain this going forward, you have to keep updating lots of different sections, different information, and even though all of these have the same attributes, same formatting, you have to change something somewhere. If you want to make a change to all of them, they all need to be changed individually. So that's where React comes in and lets you do a lot of really powerful things to leverage some of that shared information and some of that reusability. So what I'm using right now is just codesandbox.io to develop React online. I know in past tutorials for React, we've had people try and set it up using Create React App, which is a very standard tool that you can use to start a React application that you actually are developing. But for just getting started and learning, it doesn't have the quickest startup time. You have to download a lot of NPM packages and that sort of thing. So if you just want to get your hands dirty with React, even during this tutorial right now, then I would encourage you to go to codesandbox.io and click on the React preset that they have set up, and you'll be able to jump right in before you go through all the steps of adding things to your local machine. So let's try and recreate what we have here in React. So the first thing we could try is just taking all of this and putting it inside of index.js. And so how React works is in index.js, you're going to have a call to React DOM.render, and it's going to render everything you see in here inside of a root element, which it's just got set up in the HTML here. There's a lot of boilerplate, but you can see right here there's a root element in their body, and that's probably the only thing you need to look at in this file for now. So if we go back to app.js, if we go back to index.js, then we can take this and let's put this all inside a single div, which I'll touch on more later. But you can see we've got the same features right here. And if we save it, it'll format it a little bit differently than I might have liked. But you can see that in some sense, React is basically just HTML with JavaScript doing some of the work on the back end. But what we really want to do is take advantage of all this shared information and put it in React style, if that makes sense. So let's take this out and go back to what it said before. And so you'll see right here, it's rendering a component called app. And that's not a normal HTML component. If we go back here and we try to make something called app, then it's not going to know what to do with it. It's going to say, it just treats it like any other text because this isn't an HTML tag. And you can tell from the capital letter at the beginning that it's actually a React component that's defined in this file here, app.js. So this is what a React component looks like. This is what most of your React files will be. It's a function with a name starting with a capital letter, and it returns HTML. And to be specific, it's more than just HTML. It's known as JSX, which is sort of a cross between JavaScript and HTML. It'll let you do some additional things that HTML doesn't include, which we'll touch on more later. But for a quick example, we can say something like const name equals Owen. And then in here, we can go like this and say name. And then it'll say hello Owen. React will take the variable here and insert it into the JSX based on seeing these curly braces. And now we're able to sort of see some of the power that React has in leveraging JavaScript and HTML at the same time. But to get the same effect as we had before with all of our profiles, we really want to make each of these into a component. So let's make a new component here. We'll just make a new file, and we'll call this profile.js. So then to get started with a new component, you just want to export default function profile, and then return. Then you'll wrap it in parentheses, and then you'll put one component or one parent component that everything is inside of. So now we'll just say profile1 for now. And so now this is a valid React component, and we can go back to our app.js, and we can put a profile in here. And so then it'll automatically import it. You can see import profile from ./profile. And then you can do a self-closing tag with this slash at the end here and get the profile code here showing up inside of our app, which is inside of our index, which is inside of our HTML. And so React puts that all together and makes this one website. So now let's go to the profile and actually put in the code for one of these profiles that we put together. So then we'll take this, and like I said, they do all need to be inside one parent component, so that's why we keep this div here. If we tried putting another div next to it as a sibling, then React will complain, and it'll say JSX must have one parent expression. So that's why everything needs to be inside of a div. Instead of a div, you can also just use what's known as a React fragment, which is an empty tag here and then an empty closing tag at the end. And this is, depending on your use case, maybe more useful because it doesn't end up inflating the DOM hierarchy with additional divs. But for our purposes, we're not going to get into it too much. They're basically going to be the highest level thing in this application anyway. So we'll just leave them as divs, and that'll let us modify the CSS a little bit more easily later. But then the real benefit of this is now to have multiple profiles. We can just copy and paste this 4 times here, and we'll see the exact same thing. And now if we just want to make a change to our profile and add another field, say like majors, then we can go ahead and add comp sci and poly sci, and then we'll see that every component has all of this information updated in it. So now this is great for if you wanted to see a picture of Bailey 4 times, but as I mentioned earlier, we actually do have a number of different board members on our website, and we want to be able to customize each of these segments for each of those board members. So you can see here we have a lot of information that's specific to what that board member, who they are, and that kind of thing. So we're going to want to have things like a name, we're going to want to have a role, a grad year, etc. And we're going to want to be able to pass those into each individual profile. So we're going to make those parameters to our profile. So the way that a React component works is it gets passed in props from its parent. So then once it gets those, it'll be able to access, so we can say const name equals props.name. So now let's go up here and pass in a prop to our component. So we'll say the name is Bailey Conrad. And if we go in here now, we can replace this with that JSX syntax and put in name. And so now you can see Bailey Conrad shows up for the name here, but none of the following ones have any name listed because we didn't pass anything in. So we'll go ahead and we'll pass in Ryan Werner for the next one, and we'll see that those updated here now too. And so like this, you're able to customize the components that you see before you and pass in all the different information you might have. So now we want to add additional things like the role, grad year, and majors, and the profile pick. And so one way to make the syntax more concise and not have to do this 5 different times for 5 different properties is to take advantage of some nice JavaScript syntax called object destructuring, where it'll assign an object to the different variables in here. So we can do profile pick, role, grad year, and majors. And so now when an object gets passed in for props that has all those different values, they'll automatically get assigned to those variables. So we can see that Bailey Conrad is still being passed through as the name, Ryan Werner is still coming in, and we're getting all those values correctly. So then we're going to want to pass in all these other values, but we can fill these in here. So we're going to do role, we'll do grad year, and we'll do majors. And so now all those are missing because we haven't passed those through, but we can go in. Oh, and let's also update the source of the image. And so since that's expecting a string, but we already have a variable for it, then we'll need to wrap it in braces still like this, and React will still treat that as expected. We can ignore that warning for now because this is just a demo. So now let's go ahead and pass in a profile pic URL for Bailey again and see that it shows up here. And then we can do the same for Ryan. Let's grab that image URL. And so just by setting these different properties on these objects, these tags in React, we're able to make changes to the components that get rendered and more programmatically create all of this information. So now you might be saying this still looks like a lot of work. You're still changing all those same values individually and aren't really making use of many of the programmatic features. And so here's where we'll take a look at the real benefit of React, which is when you're working with custom data. So let's make an object here called profile data. And we're going to put all of this in here. So actually, let's make it profiles. And it'll be an array of all of our different users. So to start with, we're going to have name, Bailey Conrad. And we're going to have profile pic. And we'll take this same string here. And we'll do grad year 2021. And we're missing a comma at the end of this line. Okay. And then we'll do the same for Ryan. And we'll fill out that information again. And keep that there for now. So now, this is more in line with the kind of data you would be getting if you were using a database or querying some sort of API and wanted to take the data that you get from that response or from that query and use it to render a website. So now we can take this and we can make a profile for each of these users. So how we'll do that is with a map of all the profiles, which is sort of a feature that React offers on top of JavaScript. So in JavaScript, you can map any list and perform an operation on all the different values. And so we're going to take a profile and we're going to map it to a React object of a profile. And because it's a map, we should make a key on all these so that React is able to tell them apart. And then for the name, we're going to do profiles.name. For the profile pic, we'll do profiles profile dot. Sorry, this should be this profile dot profile pic. And then let's close this tag and just check that those are all working. And so now you can see that this map is intelligently taking all of these different keys from each of these different objects and is rendering the component with all those different values. So then we can also put in grad year is profile dot grad year, and role and major. Role is the profile dot role, and majors is profile dot majors. So now with this we can go ahead and add some of that missing data. We can have role is president, and majors is a list of comp sci and poli sci. And so now all that data is being passed in, and the profile is being rendered for each of those different objects in here. We can copy and paste this and get another one. And so like I said, this again still doesn't look that useful given that we're still putting in all the data by hand. But if you're pulling data from an API, from a list of users, from whatever backend data structure you have, this is much, much easier to work with than having to create custom HTML and put it all in one file and make it all sit nicely together if you're only using HTML, React, or HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So let's go in and maybe change majors so that we can have nicer separation. Let's see. I don't know if I know exactly how this, let's see, cannot read properties of undefined. There's a way to join strings in JavaScript, I promise. I just don't remember it off the top of my head. But ultimately, we could fake it here for now. As you can see, we're able to have all these different components with their own data passed in and render them in a much more intuitive way where you're rendering a profile based on all of your list of profiles, and they're all coming out looking the same with all the correct data in them. So now another nice benefit of React is the ability for it to use CSS. So here you can see we're importing styles.css, so it's going to use all the CSS we have in here. So now we can say in our profile, if we want this to be styled a certain way, then let's add an class. So in React you do that with the class name tag. The class attribute does not work. You have to use class name. I know I've made that mistake a number of times myself. So let's call this profile. And then if we go here, we can make a profile selector for that class, and we'll just put a border around it to make sure that it's working. And now we can see that all of our profiles have the same styling applied to them and are all looking the same. Let's go ahead and make this display. I think we want to do it actually on this one, don't we? On app. So let's, this is a class name, so .app. We will do display Flexbox. Display Flex, yep. And this is going to be space align items space evenly. I swear I know how Flexbox works. In any case, you can see that all of our profiles are behaving as expected. Let's put that border back on. And maybe add some margin. And now we have a pretty close facsimile of what you see here. All the same pictures and information. We've basically recreated the whole UW site in just a few short minutes here. But with the power of React, you can create some of these reusable components that make use of your data and render it all the same way in a reusable and customizable fashion. Um, and this is even still only touching on rendering a static site like you might do with only HTML. So next we're going to get into some of the features that you can do when you have JavaScript interacting so closely with your HTML. So let's add a new element here.
Excuse me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are you guys gonna post these files in the Discord after the session?
Yeah, I'll definitely make sure to download this, and I think I can share a link right now to, or at the end of the tutorial, to this sandbox that I've been working in. If you want to make a fork and continue working off of it. But yeah, I'll definitely make sure to post this whole file structure here so that you could play around with it yourself.
Sweet.
Yeah. So right here, we'll make a counter component. As an avid incremental game fan, you might be able to predict where I'm going to take this, but we're going to make another component here, so we'll just export default function counter. And now we're going to do the same as before. We're going to just return some HTML, put a div, and in here let's put some text. Let's say clicks, and then we'll put counter or count. So now we can do something like const count equals 10, and then when this renders, so let's put one of these up in here. So we'll take it, put it outside the map. We'll do a counter, and so you can see up here it automatically added this line to import counter from that file, and so we have a counter over here. In fact, let's put this in its own div with a profiles tag, or a profiles class. And so then this way we can go in our styles and just change this to profiles so that we can keep the counter out of that. Flex display. So now it'll be down here. And so now you can see it's rendering the variable like we showed before. If we change this, then it'll update and it'll show a new number. But we really want to be able to modify this somehow based on user interaction. So let's add a button down here. Click me. And we'll close that. And so now you can see we can click this button and nothing will happen because the button doesn't do anything. So we'll set an on click for the button and we will call it, we'll make it a new function here. So then in our counter here, we just have to define a function. So we can say const click equals. So I'm going to use an arrow function here because I really like arrow functions, but there's no reason you can't just define this the same as any other function. But we'll just do const click, and we'll say count equals 12. And then the on click here, we'll just say that it's click. And now you can see if we click this, assignment to constant variable. That makes sense. Here we go. And so you'll see, even though we clicked it and it changed count, nothing has happened. And that's because React doesn't know that the variable changed. And so now we're going to get to the underlying mechanism that drives a lot of React and how it works, which is the concept of state. So in a React component, there's a concept of props, which we already looked at, where data gets passed in through the tag that you render it with. And then the component itself also stores internal data in a concept called state, which is separate from the sort of data you see here. So when it renders the counter on the page here, we can see it defines count, and then it defines this function, and then it makes the JSX that gets rendered. And so even though we've clicked this, it's already created this JSX here with the count set to 11. So once we click this and change it to 12, nothing changes because it's already rendered on the page. So what we need to do is make use of state in order to tell React, hey, something's changed, can you render me again? So the way that you do that is with use state. So we're going to call it use state here. It'll auto import it from React. And so we'll want this to start at 11 just to keep us what we were at before. And so what this function does is it returns a variable and a function that sets that variable. And so usually they're assigned in this way in React sort of coding style. So the function returns count, which is the variable we'll reference, and it'll return set count, which is the function that we can use to change the value of the variable. And this way, when it gets changed, then we'll be able to change it and tell React, hey, something's different. So now when we click this, we can see that it changes to 12. But really, that's not how a counter works, is it? So we want to instead change this to update it from what it was before to what it is now. So we can call set count to count plus 1. And so now we can see it starts at 0. And if we click it, then it'll continue incrementing as we click it more and more. And if we refresh the page, the whole page and not just the inner page, I guess, but then it goes back to 0. And so state is not preserved on reload or anything like that. It's just internal to the component itself while it's on the page. But it also is true that each component has a separate state. So if we take this and we put another counter down below it, then we can see that they track their own state separately. And so even though we have the same components, and if we change some value of them here, we can see they both update. The state itself is internal to each instance of a component, and this way you're able to make pages that are interactive, and each component is its own individual instance. So I think we've covered a lot of material, and I know we've had some questions along the way. Does anyone have any questions at the moment about what we've seen so far? Okay, perfect. So now the last piece regarding state that I want to cover is one of the more difficult concepts. It definitely is a paradigm that you probably won't have encountered before if you haven't used a framework like this, but it's to do with how state is stored and how especially it's accessed from other elements. So let's say that we wanted to make the counter component into a sort of like counter. And so we go to the profile and we're going to add an element here. I'm going to call it likes. So let's add another paragraph. And let's see, likes. And now let's put a counter in here. And so now we can see how many clicks there are. And we'll get rid of this then because we just want the count and the button. And in fact, let's change this to say like. And now this way we'll be able to click on this and increment the likes of the user. Let's add a class here just so we can make this show up a little bit nicer. Class name will be counter. And then if we go to CSS, counter, margin 4px. And I don't know if this works. I don't think it does. This is, for that type of CSS, you'll need something like SAS or SCSS that'll let you do that. But then we can do, for all the, is this inside a tag at all? No. For all the buttons that are inside of here, we can give them padding left 10px, margin left 10px, I should say. So now it's a little bit better looking. Sorry for that detour. But now you can see we can increment the likes of all these different executive board members, and they store all their data independently, and we're able to see them on the page here. But now let's say we wanted to organize this list and sort it by whoever has the most likes. And so to do that, we would want to take our list of profiles and we would want to sort it somehow. And so to do that, we would need to compare some aspect of the profiles. But at the moment, we don't have access to any of those profiles counters inside of them. So we don't, when we render this component, it comes with the counter that's inside of it that we just put in here. But we don't have any idea what the actual value is of that counter. So to have access to that in our app component, in order to sort these different profiles, we need to send the state up, is the phrase that they use for it. If we go here under main concepts, lifting state up, I think is what they call it. So there's a whole article on their tutorial dedicated to it. But in general, the way that it's done is take the state declaration from a component and move it up into a higher level component, the highest level component that needs to know the data, and then pass down this information as props. So we're going to change counter to take in a count and a set count, and we're going to take this out. And so now we can see that this component will work the same because these variables have the same name. They're just coming from a different spot. So that's part of why I like this syntax for object destructuring, is you don't have to add props in front of everything now or something like that. And so now for a counter, we'll need to pass in the counter and the set count. So then we can put our const count set count in here, and then pass in count and set count. And so we'll just do it like so. And now we can see everything works the same as before. So now we've successfully lifted the state up one level, but this still isn't high enough because we want them in app.js. So now we need to go one level higher. And so we'll take this and we'll move it up into app.js, put it close here. Import use state for me again, please, React, thank you. And we're going to pass in count and set count. And we'll take those in here as more props. And so now you can see, because we're passing in the exact same count and set count to each of our values here, the values are all moving at the same time because they're the same value. So now we have access to what the count is, but we only have the one count. So to fix that, we're going to change this to counts and set counts. And so now we're going to need to add a bit more logic to our function for when you click. So we're actually going to write a function here called set single count. And so what that means is in here, the count button is expecting you to click it and increase the count of just one of those buttons, of just one of those counters. But because we have the different profiles all have different indices in this counts index, we're going to need to account for that when we're setting the state. And so the way that these set calls work is they simply replace the value that's already there. So say we want to initialize this to 0, 0, 0. If we do set count, then it's going to try and increase this by 1. And we don't really want that. So we need to, let me think about this for just a second. Yeah, so we really want to set the count for an index in the counts and the new value. So then what we do there is we have a list of counts that we start with. So that's our current counts. So then we're going to need a new counts equals counts. And then we're going to take counts I and make it new value. And then we're going to return, and then we're going to set counts to that new value, new counts. Yeah, and then new counts is this. Okay. So then, for each of these, we can see they already come with the index in the list from the map. And so then we just need to do counts I. And then here, we're going to convert this to a function. And so normally set count just takes the value to set. And so because we only want to pass in the new value, because that's all it's giving us, we're going to pass I in here, and we're going to do set count I new value. So sorry, that should be new value that we pass in here, I should say. And now this way, this function really just takes in one value like it did before. So now, if this worked properly and I knew what I was doing, then this would actually update things. So this is the fun part where we get to look at the errors now. Div kind of appears a descendant of paragraph. That makes sense. So let's just take out this paragraph. I don't think that was our problem before, though. Expected JSS closing tag for div. Did I delete a closing tag? Probably. Where did I miss something? Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Okay. The problems keep increasing, which is not ideal. Use state is defined but never used. We don't need that anymore.
Like Owen said, this is probably the hardest part of React, is passing state up.
Use state is defined but never used. Again, okay. Image elements must have an all prop. Okay. So, we're passing in the count, which should be 0 here. And then, so what some of you might be asking why we don't just put 3 separate use states for 3 different variables. And that would work in this situation, but it wouldn't scale with however many users we had. So if we put 4 profiles in here, then we would need to add a whole other counter variable. And you can't modify the number of calls to use state within a function, within a component on the fly, so to speak. So here we can do 0. It'll be an array of zeros times the length of profiles, which I know how to do in Python, and I knew how to do in JavaScript at one point. I think it's something kind of ugly like new array profiles dot length dot fill 0. So that'll give us an array of zeros, the length of profiles. So now here we could add another Ryan Warner to the end, or take one off, which is maybe better. So now there will only be 2 profile-like counts. So let's see. App.js unexpected token on line 28. I don't believe you. Let's have this print something when set count gets called. So we can have console.log count. And then we can see in our console, it's printing 0. And it printed it 4 times because it's really printing it twice, and then it'll render it, and then it re-renders it again right away, which is just sort of how the React lifestyle works. It's a bit more of a complicated topic than we're planning to cover here tonight. But let's take a look here and console.log I. And so now hopefully when we click on something, we get, so it says 0, and that says 1. Okay, so set count is being called. It's being called with the correct I, so let's console.log new value right away as well. So now 0 and 3. Yeah, so it wants to increment it. It really does. It's really trying. So then console.log new counts. I wonder if it's like I need to deep copy something here. 430, and then set counts to new counts. Let's refresh the page because there really shouldn't be 3 in there. Yeah, 1 and 0, 1 and 1. So for whatever reason, it's not passing it in again. If anybody who's here on the call with us has any idea, I would love to get your involvement here because I am certainly confused. Because we're setting the counts, and it knows what the counts are, and it's even tracking them in between these calls here. It's just not changing the actual counts in here.
Doesn't have anything to do with like the keys, does it? No, the keys look right.
The keys, so it's technically bad practice to use the index as a key because when we do something like when we're sorting, or especially when you're removing and adding things, you want the keys to be persistent. So it's probably better to use something like profile.name, assuming that the profile names are unique, which it isn't if we were to copy Ryan Werner again, but if we were to put, say, Owen Hunt. So you can see it complained here that 2 children had the same key, which you don't want to have happen. So you want to pick something immutable. So profile.name plus I is a bad solution, but it's better than either of the previous ones. So now and actually now that I look at it, if we increase the length of this, then we want the size of counts to increase as well, which is doable through another function that we would want to call. Actually, so this is a great time to talk about a use effect. And by a great time, I mean I am happy we stumbled upon it, but it's a strange use case for sure. So similar to how useState is this is what's called a hook that lets us use the state of the component. UseEffect is a hook that lets us run a function depending on certain things changing. And so specifically here, we want a function to run when profiles changed. And as you can see here, we're going to put a function, and we're going to put a list of variables to depend on. And so we're depending on profiles changing here, and we're going to run a function when they changes. And what that's going to be is we're going to take counts, and we're going to either trim it or pad it to make it the length of profiles, and then we're going to put that back in count. So I probably shouldn't be doing this when the counts don't work in the first place, but it's instructive, I think. So we're going to go in here, and we're going to say len equals profiles.length. That is const len, of course. I'm too used to Python. And then we're going to say let new counts equals array new array len.fill 0. And then for let I equal 0, I is less than length I plus plus, new counts, I is counts I. And so now we'll do set counts, new counts, and this way we'll be able to modify profiles in memory and have it increase or decrease the length accordingly. Update depth exceeded. And we're still going at that, huh? Okay, so this is something you want to worry about probably, is infinite recursion. Usually that does bad things to your GCP hosting costs. So what's probably happening is the component is rendering, and then the effect is running, and then it's re-rendering, and then the effect is running, etc. But it shouldn't be running because profiles is the thing it depends on. So if you pass in this, if you don't give it any second parameter, it'll run every time the component renders. If you give it an empty array at the end, then it will only run the first time it renders. So that's useful for setting up something like a connection to a messaging server or something like that. And then when the component unrenders, then it'll call the function that you return from here if you do that, which is an advanced topic. But here when we say profiles, it should then not re-render. So let's save this and refresh. I guess while we're sorting this out, does anybody have any questions after this debacle that we're going through?
You might want to try to put set counts into the brackets, see if that works.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, let's put counts and set counts as well. I'm used to VS Code suggesting what variables should go in here for me, which it's pretty good at. It just looks at all the different variables that are used in here, and then it says you should probably include all of these, which it's usually right about. And so thank you, Tony, for suggesting adding count and set counts, because those are definitely both used in here. I think this infinite recursion has hung my browser. I'm going to put that on my clipboard, and then I'm going to close this tab, and then I'm going to reopen the tab. Yeah, so let's put this on here before it gets too out of control. And let's look at our console. It's still a-growing, yeah. So let's comment this out for a second here. Yeah, it's managed to hang again. Let's try this one more time. Let's try and change it quickly before it has a chance to hang. This part of the tutorial was a little bit uncharted territory, as you might be able to tell from the relative flying by the seat of my pantedness that I'm exuding at the moment. But thank you all for sticking through it with us. I know we're getting close to 8 o'clock when we usually would end our meeting, but I'm devoted to staying around and figuring this out if anybody who's still here still cares to stay on and join me. But if not, thank you all for coming, and hopefully you were able to pick up some of the React fever from this. For those of you who would like a more formal introduction to React, I strongly recommend the React documentation on reactjs.org. It has this series of pages here, which is the tutorial that I learned React from. They do a fantastic job of including a lot of the same concepts we went through here, but in a lot of good detail and with varied examples. And then they also have advanced guides for tons of the different advanced concepts we talked about. There's the API reference. There's all the different hooks, which is how functional components work, basically. I wonder if we can find it in one of these examples here, because React components can also be rendered as classes. Yeah, so they have classes in their example here, which is the original way that React components were created. Definitely not a bad paradigm, but once people started realizing that not everything needs to be object-oriented and move towards the functional paradigms that we kind of left behind, I think that it's made everything a lot cleaner, and functional components are now the only thing that I preach. Unfortunately, the infinite loop seems to have propagated to the whole tab, and it no longer wants to load whatsoever. So we might have to call it here for this tutorial. I still don't know what caused the issue, but I will look into it and get this code, clean it up, and post it for everybody to be able to take a look at without hanging their browser tabs. But for now, I think that this is everything that I had hoped to cover this evening with you all here. So thank you all for coming, and once you've made something with React, please feel free to share it here, and we can all admire the wonderful abilities that React facilitates.
Awesome. Thank you, Owen.